America and the whole world. And it's been this way for really a couple decades in my involvement in public policy and politics, because he's such a real leader. He's so genuine. He doesn't need politics. He's never needed a dime from the government or any of the books that he sold or anything else. He's a genuine American hero in his own right, and a true public servant. Folks, without ado, you know that I'm talking about Dr. Ben Carson because you signed up and you downloaded this podcast to listen to. But we wanted to check in with our friend. Dr. Carson is a retired neurosurgeon. Dr. Carson has been a pioneer in the science of neurosurgery, Johns Hopkins and other places. God has used his hands to perform flat out miracles on the living and the living that have not yet been born. And he's just an amazing person. He's done so much for our movement. If you follow our 40 state organizations and get to come out and listen to the galas, I bet he speaks at 5 to 10 of them a year because he believes in our shared mission. And it's just a privilege because I'm from Detroit and I'm reporting to you from Detroit right now, Dr. Carson, to also mention that we have that shared background, you and I. And it's just a privilege to have you on the show. The 17th Secretary of Housing and Urban Development. We're going to talk about other stuff today, but thank you for being with us today, Dr. Carson.
I'm absolutely delighted to be with you and appreciate the fact that you're a patriot.
Well, you are a genuine hero of ours, and it seems as though when God made you, you have living water in you, or living fuel, I should say, because a lot of people, they build a career in neurosurgery and they retire and they say, well, I did my part, Lord. I saved a lot of lives. I showed up for work. And then other people get involved and they change their community where they live. And some even volunteer nationally and they say, that's it, Lord, I've done enough. You've served in the cabinet. You continue to change America for the better. Housing and urban development, folks. Family policy, it doesn't get any trickier than that.
Well, it was interesting because I never intended to get into public policy.
Yeah.
I intended to retire at age 61 because I had done a survey. People told me that neurosurgeons die early. So I wrote down the name of the last 10 that I knew who died and calculated the average age of death, and it was 61. So I said, I'm going to retire when I turn 61 if I'm still alive. And I was going to become a really good golfer and do a lot of traveling and read all the books that I never got a chance to read. It was going to be great. And then I gave the National Prayer Breakfast keynote in 2013. And after that, everybody was saying, you should run for president. And I was saying, these people are crazy. I said, if I just ignore them, it'll go away. But it didn't go away. Every place I went, there were people with Run, Ben, Run signs. And I had over 500,000 petitions in my office. I just finally said, Lord, if you really want me to do this, you have to give me all the things that someone who runs for president has, like an organization and a lot of money and a Rolodex with all the important names. And I said, I don't have any of those things, nor do I plan to develop them. The next thing I knew, they were all there. So our organization was raising more money than the RNC. But it was pretty cool, traveling around the country. I visited all 50 states, from the smallest little hamlets to the biggest cities. And the thing that impressed me the most was the fact that most Americans actually have common sense. What they don't have is courage. And that's what we have got to get people to realize. You cannot be the land of the free if you're not the home of the brave.
Well, tell us now, and that leads us directly to some of the work that you're doing. So tell us about the American Cornerstone Institute.
Well, when the Trump administration was finished, I once again looked forward to retirement. I said, this time I'm going to do it. But, in looking at the direction that our country was heading, I said, I would not have any fun out on the golf course watching my country go down the tubes. So myself and some outstanding people from HUD got together and created the American Cornerstone Institute, which is a think tank / do tank, because we don't just think, we do stuff too. And basically to refocus people on those cornerstone principles that made us into a great nation. It wasn't a coincidence that we went from a bunch of ragtag militiamen to the pinnacle of the world in less than a century. That was because of our belief system. And chief among those cornerstones was our faith, our Judeo-Christian values, which taught us to love your neighbor, not to hate your neighbor, not to cancel your neighbor if they have a different yard sign. Very different. The cornerstone of liberty or freedom, which was the magnet that attracted so many people to this country from all over the world, the ability to live the life that you wanted to lead and not to have a bunch of government bureaucrats telling you what you had to do and when you had to do it. And our founders worked very hard to give us a constitution to preserve that kind of freedom. And then the cornerstone of community, working together, living together, not necessarily all thinking the same thoughts, but learning the concept of the common good. That was how America succeeded. You had little communities of only 50 or 100 families, nobody else around for 50 or 100 miles. But not only did they survive, but they thrived because they understood the concept of the common good. They didn't even speak the same language, but they knew how to take care of each other. And, if Mr. Jones broke his leg during harvest season, everybody else harvested his crops, no questions asked. That sense of community was vital to creating a strong nation. And then the concept of life, from the womb to the tomb, respect for life. And as we've moved away from that respect for life, look what's happened to our relationships with each other. And so we really want to recapture all of those things. And that was the purpose of the American Cornerstone Institute. And then it had branches like the Little Patriots program, because we don't want to forget about the children. The children are our future. And of course, one of the things that the pandemic demonstrated is that our children were being indoctrinated in many cases. And, instead of teaching them the basics that they need to succeed in life, they were being taught about which pronoun should you use. Are you really a girl or a boy? If you're white, you're an oppressor. If you're a minority, you're a victim. Are you kidding me? And as a result of that, look what's happened. We recently saw the manifestation of all that kind of indoctrination with the campuses that are so anti-Semitic. All these kinds of things, because the Palestinians are viewed as victims and the Jewish people as oppressors. And that whole Marxist scheme divides everybody up into the oppressors and the oppressed and victims. And they use these kinds of things to divide our society on the basis of race, age, income, gender, religion, political affiliation, you name it, drive wedges, divide the people, because our country is far too strong to be brought down militarily, but it can be brought down from inside. And that was the whole purpose of the Faith and Family Tour that we're initiating this year. Be traveling across the country, trying to get people to realize what's happening to our country, and that we, the American people, are not each other's enemies. We're being manipulated into thinking that we're each other's enemies, but we really are not. And that we need to bring back the thing that made us strong, our families. Our families are under attack. And, if you look at a lot of the Marxist literature, they're not too fond of traditional families, because that becomes a source of strength, and they want the government to be the only source of strength. And that's the reason that they also are very anti-faith. And, we want people to understand who we are as a nation. We want people to understand our real history. And that's why we teach the good, the bad, and the ugly. But the fact of the matter is, there's a heck of a lot more good than there is bad and ugly. And there are those people who try to take the bad and ugly and make those the cornerstones of who we are.
Right.
Say that it's a systemically racist country, we're unfair to people. But if we were so horrible, why were all these people trying to get in here?
Yeah. So you and I were from Detroit. I brought that up. And let me play out one of the things that you just said. So racism exists. There's been racists for thousands, but predated America, there will be racists for thousands of years that go forward. But what we recognize in our culture is that that's a very harmful, it's not scriptural. There's not any fruit that comes from you judging somebody based on the way they look, the color of their skin. And that was a toxic, combination in America. And it seems as though we had a recognition of the harm of that. And you take places like where we're from, Dr. Carson. I'm so glad we're talking today, where we did have black-white racism. My parents were both, born in 1940 and grew up in Detroit and, the rest of it. But now I have the privilege, 2 generations later, my kids are going to the same school I went to, and there's 47 different first languages spoken, as their first language in the Detroit area. It's just this wonderful cosmopolitan, diversity everybody talks about. And it seems as though it's ruining their industry, almost like it's Acts 19:23, where they're saying, wait a second, I was molding these Artemis statues and you're putting me out of business. I need Artemis to be God, not your God. They're saying I need racism. You're eviscerating it in Detroit. So I need to have Wall Street Journal articles calling Dearborn, jihadists, and I need to have people ranked by the white people in the school are bad, and the different races are ranked in the DEI and the ESG is. Now, I don't mean to say that. I was raised a middle-class white kid in Detroit, different experience than yours. But when I hear what you're talking about is that you're actually trying to apply some of the things you learned in your youth as the origin of these vile things, and you're trying to teach and lift America up out of them. Is that what American Cornerstone Institute in the Little Patriots program are meant, is to not do the exact same thing that white people were doing to black people, in the old days? Is that what we're trying to avoid?
Well, we in fact, as you've stated, we want to look at the positive things that have happened, the positive aspects of this country. The reason that so many people are trying to come here, even with people bad-mouthing our country. And, you take something like racism. Was there a lot of racism in our country? Yes. When I was a kid growing up in Detroit, it was ubiquitous. I tell the story in my book, Gifted Hands, about when I was in the 8th grade, and they gave a special certificate for the kid with the highest academic achievement. And I had turned everything around academically, gone from the bottom of the class to the top of the class, and I was going to get the award. And you had to take your report card around to each class, and the teacher would mark it. And I had all A's, and I was down to the last class, which was band. And the turkey gave me a C to ruin my report card so that I wouldn't get the award. But to his chagrin, it turned out that band didn't count, so I got the award anyway. And one of the teachers got up during the award ceremony and chastised all the white kids because you're not trying hard enough. Because how can this black kid be number one? And that kind of attitude was actually prevalent in those days. It has changed dramatically now. People don't even think that way anymore. And you think about when I was 6 years old, I went to Tennessee. And I remember seeing the whites only and color only signs, and somebody was explaining to me why you needed to observe that. And now, in the same lifetime, and I emphasize that, the exact same lifetime, now we have black generals and admirals and CEOs of Fortune 500 companies and heads of foundations and university presidents. We've had a president of the United States. I mean, to say that we haven't made tremendous progress is ridiculous. Doesn't mean that we've reached utopia, but it means that we've made massive progress. And what we have to do is learn. We have to learn from our past, learn from our mistakes, learn from our triumphs, and use them in a way that works for all of us. and not allow ourselves to be hacked apart and destroyed.
So how can we be helping you with this? Because your lived experience, thank you for bearing witness to that. Thank you for being comfortable to share that with our audience. That's why we're talking to you today. You're a trusted voice to us, Dr. Carson. You've gone before us with some of these hard fights with public policy, and you've been called all sorts of names, and you've been, people have given you a rough ride. And that's what people are experiencing right now that are working and volunteering to try to make a difference in 2024. A lot of people believe it's not just the presidency anymore. It's the local school district, and it's the local, elected officials, and they're animated. They want to be involved. So how can we be involved, Dr. Carson, with the American Cornerstone Institute? How can we plug in with you? Obviously, folks, and before we say anything, we are a fan and we are a partner, and we were going to be promoting what Dr. Carson does. There's going to be links here for you. And as you check back, we're going to keep those links current so you can plug right in. But I always like when we have a guest on for you to explain what you would like to see from our audience. We have 50,000 churches in America that work with us every week through our 40 state organizations, millions of Christians in the body of Christ right now. How can we be helping right now, Dr. Carson?
AmericanCornerstone.org. That's the website. And just go there and look at the multitudinous things that are there. Educational tools. For instance, we have the Executive Branch for America. And all of this stuff is free, by the way, because we get wonderful underwriters from all over the country who recognize the importance of what we're doing and underwrite the cost. Otherwise, it would be prohibitively expensive. But the Executive Branch for America tells you exactly how the government works. And we're actually aiming it particularly at college students and young professionals who might want to get involved in government so that they can hit the ground running. They don't have to spend the first year like deer in the headlights trying to figure out what's going on and how things interact. And as a special feature of that, we have interviews with people like the former head of the Office of Management and Budget, public liaison, many of the cabinet positions. All of these interviews are conducted by Sarah Huckabee Sanders, who's a good friend and supporter. And you'll see many people that you know and are very fond of giving their perspectives on government. We want you to get involved. We want you to go to your school board meetings. We want you to run for the school board. We want you to make sure that you understand the privilege of voting. Most people, they don't study. They don't know who the candidates are. They don't know what their record is. When they go into the voting booth, they just look for the name that looks familiar. It could be Satan. Oh, yeah, I know that one. In many cases, it is. You don't really want to do that. You want to vote intelligently and put the people in who have the same values as you do, because the vast majority of Americans actually have good values, but they're not active. And they just sort of sit and observe and complain. And our founders knew something very important. They studied every governmental system that ever existed in the history of the world. They were eclectics. They extracted the good stuff and threw out the bad stuff because they wanted to create the kind of society that would remain free. They also recognized in studying all the governmental systems that existed that all governments tend to move in the same direction. They grow, they infiltrate, and they dominate. And they wanted to give us something that would prevent that from happening. You can already see it happening in our society. The whole COVID mandate thing was a very good example of how they can use something to get into your lives. But, you look how we have a government now that's trying to tell you what kind of car you should be driving, when in fact, market forces should determine what kind of car you should drive. That's one of the ways we got to the pinnacle. We allowed market forces to drive innovation and entrepreneurship. And if we don't drive those things, we'll become like everybody else. In the last 150 years, 90% of the major inventions came out of the United States of America. Is that because we have smarter people than everybody? No, it's because we had an environment that encouraged entrepreneurship and innovation. And the system that was created was a wonderful system, and we need to continue that. With our Little Patriots program.
Yeah, before you jump into that, I want to say that on the Little Patriots, because I agree with you. And folks, that we're taking this very seriously, that we thought that our elected officials could do everything for us. And if we had a majority, so to speak, or government control somewhere of people we perceive to be on our side, that we could just trust that our kids are being protected. COVID, other things showed that that's not true. And it's unreasonable to think somebody in Washington, D.C., or somebody in your state Department of Education truly knows what's going on in the classroom where you live. So parents, you do need to be involved in parenting your kids. You do need to be involved. This is not Dr. Carson saying it. This is Craig DeRoche saying it. So don't yell at him. I believe, you can say too, Dr. Carson, you believe in that, but I know you do. I'm just teasing you. He is in the Little Patriots program answering a question for parents like me, that I can say that and I can be all self-righteous and pious. But the truth is I don't have time and I don't have the materials to educate my kids well, the way I would like to, right? And Dr. Carson, this is part of why I think he's an American hero. He knows that's the gap. He's been a father, he's been a grandfather, he's helped a lot of other families out, and he has this experience and he has access to resources. So you've developed resources to help people like me, like the Star Spangled Adventures cartoon series and stuff like that. Tell us about this Little Patriots program, because that's what, folks, this isn't a lecture you're getting from Dr. Carson. He's here to help you. He's here to help you. And that's why we want to learn about American Cornerstone Institute, Little Patriots program. Dr. Carson, thank you for being with us.
Absolutely.
Jump right back in Little Patriots program.
Well, with the Little Patriots program, we're stimulated by the Bible verse, Proverbs 22:6, which says, train up a child in the way he should go, and when he's old, he'll not depart from it. Unfortunately, the Marxists understand that too. And it was Vladimir Lenin, one of the fathers of Marxism, who said, give me your children to teach for 4 years, and the seed that I sow will never be uprooted. We have to make sure that we plant the right seeds, and that's what the program is all about. We have something called Star Spangled Adventures, which is an animated cartoon series. Each series develops one particular topic. So you, for instance, have the Star Spangled Banner and how that came about. Lewis and Clark, the Constitution. And it's done in a very entertaining way. And there are lesson plans that go with each of them, so that you can really dive into it as much as you want. And it's particularly good for homeschools, but also many private schools are adopting it. Even some public schools. The state of Alaska has added it officially to its curriculum. And there are a few other states that are planning to do that as well. And, we just want to make sure that we get the right information to our kids, because your history determines your identity. And your identity is the basis of your beliefs. That's why so many on the progressive side are so anxious to destroy our history or rewrite our history, so that they can then inculcate their doctrines and their beliefs. This is the reason that whenever ISIS makes a conquer, they destroy the history of the place. They destroy the museums and the libraries and all of these things, so that they can implant their own philosophies and indoctrinate the people in an appropriate way. That's what's going on in our society. And one of the reasons that we're going around and doing the Faith and Family Tour is to make sure that people know what's happening, because Marxism operates best in the darkness when people don't actually know what they're doing and manipulate them. And the sad thing, of course, is that our media has been unfortunately commandeered by the Marxists. Now, a lot of us think that this is something of recent origin, but if you go back and you look at the congressional record, January the 10th, 1963, more than 60 years ago, the Congressman Herlong from Florida read into the congressional record the 45 goals of communism in this country. One of them was to gain control of the media and of Hollywood so that they could gradually affect the entire psyche of the nation. And the sad thing is the media doesn't seem to realize that the first thing communist and Marxist regimes do when they gain full power is control the media. They don't realize that they're digging their own grave, and they need to be on the side of the people, and they need to recognize the reason that the press is the only business that is protected by the Constitution is because they were supposed to disseminate unbiased information to the people, because the country was to be run on the will of the people. Now, a lot of people in Europe and other places thought that was crazy. You can't have a country run on the will of the people. Those Americans are absolute crazy people. And yet, it obviously worked, and it worked very well, to the extent that in 1831, Alexis de Tocqueville came here from Europe to try to figure out what the heck was going on, because they were saying, how could this nation, barely 50 years old, already be competing with us on virtually every level? And, he looked at our government. He was duly impressed by our system of checks and balances. And he looked at our business environment, and he was very impressed by the innovation and entrepreneurship and how our government actually encouraged that. And then he looked at our educational system, and he was completely flabbergasted. He could find a mountain man in the middle of the forest, and the guy could read. The guy could tell you about the Declaration of Independence. Our educational system was incredible. And if you really want to be impressed, go back and look at an exit exam for the 6th grade 150 years ago. See what you had to know just to get out of the 6th grade. I doubt most of the adults today could pass that test. But where there was a tremendous emphasis on education. And then the thing that impressed them the most, however, were the churches and the fiery sermons that came from those pulpits that stimulated our militia, our ragtag militia, to defeat the most powerful military force on earth, and gave our citizens a sense of morality. Now, some people will immediately attack and they say they didn't have morality because they had slavery. Well, some people try to make it seem like slavery makes us uniquely evil. But the fact of the matter is, if you know world history, there is no society, no civilization that hasn't had to deal with slavery. And in fact, there are more slaves in the world today than there have ever been when you look at human trafficking. And the thing that makes America unique is not that we had slavery, it's that we had so many people who vehemently opposed it that we fought a bloody civil war and lost a large portion of our population to get rid of the evil institution. And we learned from that. That's what we need to be teaching our children, not that we are inherently evil.
Well, Dr. Carson, I want to ask you about Perilous Fight Tour and how people can be involved in there. But what you just said is really poignant. And this is, again, these are my words, not yours. I was enslaved to alcohol addiction for 25 plus years of my life before I gave my life to Jesus Christ. I see people getting snared by gambling, sex, pornography, debt. I could go on. We solve our problems in all sorts of unscriptural ways that we look to as our as our solution, and certainly these things were there, but we have a lot of hope, and I just want to say that that's really triggering me these days, where this talk about our past, where we absolutely get one thing complete, and it wasn't just the one thing. We also treated women as black men were able to vote before white women, in America by decades. And now we're treating the unborn as though they're not human beings, and to some of us in the Christian faith, they're all uniquely. I'm not saying they're apples and apples, but I'm saying that as evil goes, I recognize it. I'm becoming clear that if we defeat these great scourges of slavery, they'll be replaced with Jim Crow, and Jim Crow will be replaced with Roe versus Wade. Will be replaced with these other schemes that try to devalue someone's liberty and their individual franchise they have. But you have helped us, and you're out front, and you're pouring your experience in to the American Cornerstone Institute. You're inviting those of you in this audience, Family Policy Alliance. You get to hear from Dr. Carson all the time when you come to our events. He's one of our favorite leaders. It's a privilege to be with you today, sir. What can we be doing? What should we know about the Perilous Fight Tour? And then I got one more question for you as we wrap up, and we'll get the Army assembled for you, Dr. Carson, ready to take the field here today.
Well, I hope people are realizing that as we move further away from our faith, we're spiraling downward very rapidly. And the Faith and Family Tour is to help people realize that. And you can go to the website, AmericanCornerstone.org, to find out more about where we will be. It's possible that we can come to your church. We have an application form there to make that a possibility. And we also encourage people to look at organizations like My Faith Votes that encourages you to vote your values, vote your faith, and to start early. Don't wait until the last minute. Start early, discovering who these people are that are running and how you can get involved, how you can perhaps become one of the people who observe at the polling places. One of the reasons that Glenn Youngkin won the governorship in Virginia is because they had 95% of the precincts observed carefully. And that really cut down on mischief that was done. That's what we need to be doing, because there is mischief going on.
Absolutely. So, Dr. Carson, and a lot of that mischief was cut down by the great organization, the Family Foundation of Virginia, Victoria Cobb. Those of you that get to see her on this show and these podcasts occasionally, we have a big task in front of us, and that's a great transition, Dr. Carson. You've been on the ballot. You've run for president. You've been in the cabinet of a president, and now you are inspiring and you're helping Americans discern where they might roll up their sleeves and apply their own leadership, their time and their talent, their energy. Are you optimistic for America as we head into the 24 election? Because we like, our audience can sometimes, they watch the news, they get a little depressed. We at Family Policy Alliance, our organizations have never seen an opportunity like this, but somebody who's experienced at the levels that you're experienced at in service to our country, what do you think? And do you think we have an opportunity to improve our situation here at the ballot box this year as Christian, social, conservative voters?
Well, I can tell you from my experience in Washington, D.C., there's a lot of evil and there's a lot of corruption. However, if God was willing to save Sodom and Gomorrah for the sake of 10 people, we got this. We're okay. But we have to do our part. That's the key.
Yeah, I agree. And I think it's out there, in a great way to get them started is for you to share this podcast and the great work of Dr. Carson, the American Cornerstone Institute. He puts a lot of this into it, and it's a brilliant strategy, and it has the tactics that we need as parents, as Christians, and as just concerned citizens where we live, to roll up our sleeves and to take the field. So, Dr. Carson, it's always a privilege to get time with you. Thank you for sharing your experience and this wonderful invitation for engagement to our audience, and know that you can count on us at Family Policy Alliance and in our state organizations to continue to work side by side with you, sir. You're an inspiration to us all.
Well, thank you so much. It was a pleasure being with you. And we are going to win. Thank you.
Amen.